So how do you know you have a bad brake caliper? Two things you can do very quickly. Now this happens to be a 2010 Subaru Impreza with roughly 150,000 miles. Going down the road, I would hear this clanging noise, almost like a wheel is loose. In this case, the front driver's side. But when I depressed the brake pedal, the noise would completely dissipate. Completely gone. So that told me immediately something is going on with the braking system. So at this point I just have the car jacked up and on jack stands and I remove the wheel. That's all I've done at this point. But if I grab the caliper and shake it, this is ultimately what I'm listening to going down the road. It should not be this loose. So let's compare it with the other side. The passenger side. The passenger side, I'm not hearing anything. So let's see if I can move the caliper here. And as you can see, it's rock solid. So that tells me something is going on with the caliper. Now you may be thinking maybe it's the hardware, but let's just test the source. Let's test the caliper very, very quickly. Now if you're not familiar with my videos, everything is with basic hand tools. Secondly, it's always pretty much in my home garage. So in other words, if I can do it, so can you, especially now with COVID. Maybe you're furloughed, you need to save some cash. You can completely do this job at home. All the tools I'll be showing today, I'll have links in the description box below to our Amazon affiliate site. You really don't need many, fortunately. So we need to remove the caliper off the bracket, and you have two fasteners. Now many Asian vehicles, the top fastener really is just a pin, it's a slide pin. So the top fastener we can leave alone. The bottom fastener, both of them really are 14mm fasteners, and instead of nailing your hand and maybe hurting yourself, just grab a 3-pound hammer. Whoops, a little too excited there I suppose, right? Here we go. So it's a 14mm. Okay, that's all these are. This slides up. Maybe a little stuck, let's see. Sometimes I may just grab a flathead, pry it off the bracket. There's a bracket right here holding everything on. There we go. And then this slides out, okay? So as you can see. So now to test the caliper, I need the brake pad. So this is the front brake pad, and this is the rear brake pad. Okay, just removing the brake pads. And you can certainly see, after a decade worth of driving in the Northeast, it takes a toll on these cars. It really does. Driving in the snow and salt and nasty weather, cars really get beat up around here. So, but again, just using, that's the wrong brake pad, you can tell because on the back I have the two piston marks. So that goes here. Just resetting up, essentially resitting the brake pads, except there's an eroder here. So I need to create something here so the pistons aren't pushed out. What happens is, in other words, if I press down the brake pedal right now, if this is a working caliper, these pistons would be pushed out and then the brake fluid would completely gush all over the place, and then I have to rebleed the whole system. I don't want to do that. I just want to see if they're moving. So the brake pads along with just shims. Okay, just some regular wood shims. Place it like this. Let me get a better angle for you. Now what I'm going to do is just depress the brake pedal. Press down the brake pedal a bunch of times and let's see if these pistons are moving. Here we go. Let's see. Looks like this one is moving, but the rear one is not. Let me press it a little bit harder. Yep, so that tells me that this piston is not good, so really we need a caliper. Now the new caliper assembly comes with a bracket along with the hardware. But I need to remove or loosen up, there's a little banjo fastener right here. And I need to loosen this up. Now this has not been removed in 10 years. So it's going to be very, very hard to try to remove this the way it is. So might as well replace it back in, the bracket. And we can use the bracket to hold the caliper in place so we can at least loosen up that fastener. Okay, now, so right here is the brake hose. And what I tend to use is a hose pinching plier. Now these pliers are made specifically for hoses. This is so we lose a minimum amount of brake fluid. You don't have to do it, but again, that's all it takes. So let's start by loosening up that banjo fitting. It's a 12 millimeter in my case. Just tap it lightly. And the new caliper also has a new banjo fitting. Okay, that's loose. Now let's take the caliper back out. This comes out. This comes out. Like so. Temporarily put this here. Now I need to remove the bracket because the new caliper comes with a brand new bracket as well, or I should say the remanufactured caliper. In terms of cost, typically around 65 bucks for the caliper, each caliper, and most auto parts stores charge around $50 for a core charge. So in other words, you purchase the caliper, install it on your vehicle, and then you bring back your old caliper and they give you back 50 bucks. So two fasteners hold on the bracket. I'll show you where these live in a moment. They're 17 millimeter, typically for most vehicles or for a lot of vehicles. So right here. Okay, so these, well, there you go. So right here, you have two 17 millimeter fasteners. And now we can remove the banjo fastener. Now if I'm going too fast, just watch this over again. But once I get this on the bench and compare it to the new unit, you'll get a much better idea of really where all these fasteners live. Now brake fluid is very, very corrosive, but because we're using this hose plier, we don't have fluid just gushing out here. If you don't use something like this and you just plan on swapping over this banjo fitting immediately to the new part, just make sure the master cylinder does not run dry, which you'll see in a second. Okay, I'll show you what that is in a second. If you don't know what a master cylinder is, just remove this. Okay. Now this is free and clear. Whoops. That was a really stupid mistake. Okay. That was a very, very silly mistake. So don't make that mistake, obviously. And I'll just clean this off with some brake clean. So here's the brand new part along with the old part. As you can see, the new part or the remanufactured part, everything is included. Bracket, I have new hardware for the brake pads, fasteners, everything is really ready to rock and roll. The main thing to watch is when you remove the fastener, the banjo fastener here, you'll have two brass O-rings. Typically there's two of them. Make sure, the other one is pretty much solidified on here, make sure that you remove them, because otherwise you'll have a leak, and as you can see we have new washers right here. So let's reinstall it. So suppose after 10 years and 150,000 miles, that's not too shabby. And this car is driven a lot, and driven quite hard, I should say. So let's just put on this fastener. No need to go crazy right now. I'll make it tight once I reinstall this on the bracket. So let's reinstall the bracket. Now you can always torque these down. I just tend to tap them lightly with a hammer. Now these are the brackets that come with the remanufactured kit, and this is just a little brake grease to keep the pads moving nicely. The brake pads sit on these essentially. So a little bit of grease right here. You don't need a lot, don't go crazy with it. Just a little bit. Okay, sits in there nicely. So as you can see, you can really tackle this yourself. It's not too difficult. Shop wood, my guess, maybe 300 bucks, as opposed to you can do it for less than a third and do it on your own. Do it by yourself, have a friend help you, whatever. Now if your brake pads are worn, now's a very good time to replace them. In my case, these are still in good shape, so I'm just reusing them. Okay, there we go. And just a little bit of brake grease on the rear pad. Grab our caliper. Fasteners. Let me move this plier out of the way. Okay. And the fasteners holding down the caliper, they're not very tight from the factory, so just a little tap. So now I can fully tighten down this fastener. Okay. Now this is a flare wrench. If you compare it to your normal open-end wrench, you can see it's constructed quite differently. It's really made to grip brake fittings so they don't strip out. That's the whole point behind a flare wrench. Most of them are 10 millimeter. Same with the connections at the master cylinder, for example, if you ever had to replace that. So you take a look at the grip here. Hold on. There we go. Grips it really well, and I'm just going to open this up and let gravity do the work. In other words, let the fluid flow directly. Oh, there we go. It's already coming out, as you can see. Now I'm going to bleed the brakes. Let me show you the setup I have. There's so many different ways you can do this, and this is something I showed a couple years ago, but let me just show you what I have. Now, this is a one-man bleeding kit. That's really what they're called, and they're less than $10. I just happen to have one. You can also use a vacuum pump, which I've shown in the past. You can just grab an extra water bottle, drill a hole through the top, and then just feed a tube like this right through that hole. The main thing is you want to make sure you have your tube in the fluid, okay? Because if you don't do that, then you're sucking air back in the system. So, as you can see, I have fluid in here, clean fluid. And I'm going to open the valve, and now I'm going to press down on the brake, and let's just see how much air bubbles come out here. And then we'll close this off, and already this looks pretty good. Now when you do this, you just want to keep an eye on the master cylinder. If this runs dry, then you have to bleed the entire system. In other words, the front and the rear brakes. So that's all it really takes. So I'm just going to maybe do this one more time, make sure there's no air in the system, take the car for a quick test drive, and just make sure that we're okay. So at this point, I think what's a good idea is to replace the other 3 brakes. Again, after 10 years and after seeing what that brake caliper was like, it just makes sense. Do the due diligence, replace. So, I'm just thinking, what are we going to do with this car next? I'm not sure. Hopefully, we're pretty much caught up on the Subaru. We recently did the head gasket, which was removing the engine, disassembly, putting it all back together, and plopping it back in the car. So, I think that's probably a wall for this Subaru, which is fine with me. Now we can move on to something else. Maybe something fun. Camaro, Porsche, Firebird, which you don't see a lot anymore. I have some ideas, so hopefully pretty soon we'll have something else. So thank you for watching.